Have you ever noticed how the state of your body shapes the state of your money? How the way you breathe, rest, or respond to stress can quietly guide every financial decision you make. So often, we think of money as numbers on a screen. But the truth is, it begins long before that. It begins inside of us. The stories we carry about money, what's possible, what's enough, what we're worth, are written deep into the body. They live in our nervous system, in our patterns, in the loops of thought we repeat without realizing. But here's the beautiful thing. The brain can rewire. The body can learn safety again. And when we shift those internal signals, when we feel calm, safe, and open, we naturally create new experiences of abundance. I'm Ana Ramos, and this is the Health and Wealth Podcast. Today, I'm joined by coach and clinical hypnotherapist Louise Jeffrey to explore how our minds, our bodies work together to shape our relationships with money, and how coming back to your body may be the most powerful wealth strategy you'll ever practice. Louise's neuroscience, hypnotherapy, and traditional Chinese medicine background make her the perfect guide to connect energy, biology, and belief. We'll talk about how natural pathways and emotional patterns influence financial flow, and how coming back to your body may be the most powerful wealth strategy you'll ever practice. Thank you so much for joining us today. And isn't technology amazing? Here you're sitting all the way across, and I can't even say across the pond anymore. You're sitting in Australia. Here I'm sitting in Mexico City, and we're connecting thanks to beautiful technology. So welcome.
Thank you. So good to be here.
And, I did promise that we were going to go brief on this, but I want us to get started. So in getting started, we're going to start really right off the top of the bat. What is a money story? We hear so much about money story, money story, money story. What is a money story?
A money story, Anna, is really the way that we relate to money. It is essentially the way that it's the relationship that we have with money. It's the story that we've grown up with when it comes to money. And it is essentially the way that money ends up showing up in our lives right here, right now. So, for example, if you find that you have a stressful relationship with money, if there's stress around money for you, then your money story is one that could definitely be worked on. And the beautiful thing about our money story and about the way that we relate to money is that it's not fixed. It's something that can be nurtured, that can be changed, that can be grown into something that's really helpful and healthy, and it's really something that I really believe that every single human being should be able to have a really good, solid, fulfilling relationship with money, where it's an amazing give and take.
Yeah, and I find that to be so important in today's world, because obviously I work a lot with people, people and their money, and I see the reactions that they have when we talk about money, or we talk about the dreaded word that we don't use that word, but the dreaded word called budget, right? We like to use the word allocation. And I like to pay attention to people's body language more than anything else, because that tells me so much about their own money story. But you mentioned earlier a little bit about how it has to do with our relationship with money. Our money story is how, the relationship we have with money. Tell me, can we dig a little bit deeper into that? And, what does that mean? Like if there is a money decision that we need to make, a financial decision, or, and this can be an everyday, not just a big decision, right? Can you go a little bit deeper into what that means, our relationship with money?
So this is a really interesting thing. And when we take a little bit of a deeper dive into our relationship with money and our money story, we tend to think of money as human beings. We tend to think of money as a physical thing. I think you and I have talked about this before. But we tend to think of it as, it's either money in cash, or it's money in our bank account, or it's an electronic transaction. And we tend to think of it as something kind of separate from us. But money and our relationship with money, when we start to see money as an energy that either flows in and out of our lives with abundance or is blocked in some way, that's when we start to see that money is not really just a physical, tangible thing, that there is a way that we relate to money, which is actually a direct reflection of our lives in general. It's a direct reflection of our energy in that moment too. And our money story really starts not just in this lifetime with the way that our parents related to money, but it also goes back generations and generations, because the way that our ancestors related to money, the ways that our great grandparents and our grandparents and our parents related to money, was really passed down to them, generation to generation. And I think I was saying earlier, your relationship with money is not fixed. It is not something that is set in stone, but it is really handed down to you based on the way that your parents were with money, based on how they related to money, whether they had an helpful or an unhelpful, or a healthy or an unhealthy relationship with money. And then it also depends on the experiences that you have with money as you grow up and as you move into adulthood. Depending on the experiences that you have, it can really determine your relationship with money.
That's so interesting. So, a lot of times and I've heard this, right? Money doesn't grow on trees, or we don't have enough for this, or there's no money for that. Is that what you're talking about? Like when this little conversations or comments or snippets that get done and we hear in our lives, is that kind of what begins to form our relationship with money?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'll share my money story just very, very briefly to kind of give you an example. But when I was growing up, I grew up in a really, really happy household. There was a lot of love in our household. But one of the things that I really remember from when I was very young was that my parents would fight about money. And it was really the only time that I remember feeling unsafe, in my own house, was when there was this kind of conflict between my parents. And I was a very sensitive individual, so I took on a lot of that kind of unhealthy energy between my parents in the way that they related to money and the way that they felt unsafe. And so I kind of took that on. And so I used to hear my parents say things like, money doesn't grow on trees, or there's not enough money to go around. And so I carried that relationship with money from childhood into adolescence and into adulthood. And what happened then, Anna, is that I started to feel scarcity and lack. You probably have heard these terms used before. It's where we feel that we don't have enough. And whether or not that's true is an entirely different scenario. For me, it wasn't always necessarily true that I didn't have enough. I certainly wasn't on the street, or I didn't have issues with not having enough food, for example, in my house. Like, there certainly are people in the world who have that. So it's a reality for them. But very often our relationship with money can be one that's rooted in scarcity or lack, even when we're not necessarily, as I say, that there is enough to go around, but we can be left with this feeling that there isn't enough to go around. And so when we start to examine our relationship with money, when we start to examine what is really going on, and we start to pay attention, we see that each and every single one of us has a relationship with money. We have a belief system around money. And that's really what we're talking about today. Our money story is really the way that we relate to money, and it's essentially the way that it's the things that we believe about money. I don't know if you've got anything to share around, around that, and how yours has evolved over the years, or what your awarenesses are around. But every single person who's listening to this podcast, we'll talk a little bit later on about how you can really start to ask the right questions to understand what your relationship with money is.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. My money story, and It's so funny. I think I've rewritten it so much since that if I actually have to go back and remember, I probably don't remember the trueness behind it. Here's what I remember today, right? And this is after me working through many aspects of it. I remember, for example, and we didn't grow up with a lot of money. My mom was a missionary. She went to Argentina. There's like a whole story behind it. She wanted to learn Spanish, and what was this gringa going to do, in a Latin country? So she just, she went ahead and she became a pioneer at such a young age. And in today's term, 29, she was back then, and she just became a pioneer. She says, I'm going to go to Argentina and to be able to learn the language. She also said she wasn't going to get married. She wasn't going to have kids. She was definitely not marrying a Latin man because of the Latin man reputation. And, she was only going to be there 3 years. And she ended up being there 20 years. She had 3 Latin kids. And she ended up marrying a Latin man. So, it's amazing what happens when you say no. But, in having these conversations with her, and I think that as I've grown up and I've become older, I've kind of freed up myself to have more conversations about it with her. And if there's one thing I remember from my mom is that she will always try to put the positive spin on things, and she would never do it consciously. I don't think she ever did it consciously. I think she just did it because it's who she is. And, when I say that, for example, if we would all get A's in our report cards, right? I remember one time she did a special dinner at the house. And way back then, I'm kind of going to age myself a little bit or date myself a little bit. But, there was the A team, right? And you had Mr. T, the big guy, Mr. T. And she went ahead and we got home. And because she had gotten our report cards and all of us had gotten A's across the things, we were sort of nerdies. It was my mom's fault. She stuck us in school year round. But, because we all got A's, she did a special dinner and she called it the A team. And then she took, everybody from the A team and put our faces into each of the characters, right? And that was my mom. And that's how she helped us. Like, in having conversations with her later, like there were some times where dinner was just, it was sauteed spinach and what is that red thing called? And now the Spanish name comes up, which is remolacha, right? But she would put eggs on it, and she made it like a fun thing for us to have. And sometimes she's like, I didn't even know who was going to show up for dinner. I didn't even know if we were going to have enough. But she never shared that with us. She always brought the excitement to it. So my money story, and whether that was the truth or not, I have already rewritten my money story. So to me, that was positive. And, I think that the way she raised us, I have rewritten a lot of the perhaps hurtful moments, and they're no longer hurtful to me. They're just these beautiful memories. So, and I want to ask you, so you said this is how you grew up and you lack safety. You lack the feeling of safety, what did that do for your internal system? When you say, I didn't feel safe, right? How did you feel? How did your entire neural system, right? Because you are into that, so you understand what I mean. How did your entire nervous system react? What does safety mean to you in that sense? Like, what did it create this unsafe space?
So, Anna, if I reflect back and I think about that time, when and there was a particular period growing up in my early teens when things were pretty stressful financially for our family. I actually remember there were kind of 2 things. One was the anxiety that I felt in my body, and it was really in the pit of my stomach. And again, it was only as I grew older and I reflected back did I really notice what was going on. I could really, and I could recognize that same feeling being brought forward into my adult life. But there was also a period of time in my early teens when it was the one and only time I ever remember, being depressed. And essentially, for me, it was the body really just went into a fight or flight response. It was really where I noticed that I would feel quite severe anxiety. My thoughts would start to race. My heart would start to pound, and it was almost as if the it was almost like a neural response within the body. It was like my central nervous system was really trying to tell me something. Now, like I said to you, as I grew up and as I grew into a woman and into my 30s, I started to notice that stress response that I felt in my body, that neural response that was kind of going on, wasn't directly related to the reality of the situation that I was experiencing.
Wow.
So, for example, I would get a little trigger if I looked at my bank account and I noticed that there was less in my bank account than I thought there was, like I'd overspent in some way. It certainly didn't mean I was going to be on the street or that I was going to, lose my job or not have enough to eat or get kicked out of my house. None of that. But I had that same nervous system response of fear, of lack, of scarcity, where I would contract and my
Yeah.
stomach would tighten and my body would go into a stress response. And so that is really the cellular memory of the trauma, if you will, that I experienced as a child around money. And it's certainly not trauma in the traditional sense that we know it, but what we do know, and as we understand trauma, as we as the understanding, the research behind trauma evolves, that there, lots of little experiences of what's perceived to be trauma can still be experienced as trauma in the body. And you and I talked about this earlier, right? Those experiences are stored in the body's cells. And so we have the body itself tells us, and there are obviously thoughts that go with that as well, because we feel what we think and we think what we feel. And if we pay attention, we'll notice
Absolutely.
that there are thoughts that go with the money story, the belief system, and there are feelings, and there's a nervous system response. So the body expresses that money story, that disharmony, those experiences. It continues to express those experiences in the body as we grow older, unless we learn how to step outside of those subconscious programs or those money stories. And obviously, the first step towards that is awareness.
I love that because I think that sometimes, you know, money is not something we talk about. It's not something that we talk with freedom and with compassion and with love and, in the understanding that we didn't just create our money story based on our what happened to us in this lifetime, right? It's really carried on from generations upon generations. What we heard from a young age, and it'll be interesting to even explore with your parents, the relationship that they have with money, and the lack of safety that it created in you. What was their growing up like, right? What was the conversation their parents were having? And so, money stories, to me, they go back so many generations, right? And like you said, it's bringing awareness. So at what point, and you said you were in your 50s, but at what point did you realize, not so much from an age perspective, but at what point did you realize that your money story, as you knew it, as you had experienced it and lived it, no longer served you?
Such a beautiful question, because it really was a pivotal moment in my life. And, Anna, what it was is that I noticed that it was actually as I'd moved out of corporate and was moving into my coaching practice and starting to earn money in a very different way to what I was used to, where I was, giving back. It's what I wanted to do, giving back in a meaningful way, coaching people on, on how to create optimal health, how to master their thoughts and all of those things. And I noticed that in most other areas of my life, I was really able to create the abundance, really, really work with my mind and work with my body. But there was this real kind of block when it came to money. I noticed that there was a really strong nervous system response. And I think I said this earlier, that I noticed that even when I, there wasn't, the reality wasn't that I was really destitute or that, or that there was an issue with money, but I noticed that there was this very strong stress response. And so I reached a point, where I was pretty much burnt out in 2017, 2018, 3 young boys, running my own business. And I reached a point where I was like, I was doing. And I know that we're going to talk about this, on our next episode, but I was really pushing incredibly hard in that masculine energy to try and earn money, to try and bring money into the family because we had a lot of expenses. And I ended up, physically and health-wise kind of collapsing in a heap and almost having to take a full year out. And it was a really pivotal point for me. We actually moved to India for a year. My husband got us a
Oh,
convent there.
wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was an incredible, I'd been asking the universe to help me to transform my relationship with money and to heal my relationship with money, because there was just so much fear and so much lack. And it was only really in that year when I took a year out and I was able to really sit and ask the right questions and reflect on the relationship with money that I had, and then start to heal my relationship with money, that I was able to see the story for exactly what it is and what it was. And these beliefs that I carried with me around, money doesn't grow on trees. Um, and I started to foster and build and nurture that relationship with money. And I started to lean more into a relationship of trust. Um, there's such a deep psychology around money, and a lot of it is rooted in this sense of being able to trust that you are always going to have what it is that you need. And that's the more feminine aspect to money. But for me, it was about slowing down and becoming more feminine in my in my response to money and in the way that I related to it. And it was through that process of reflection, of slowing down, of meditating, that I started to rewrite my money story, and I have done so in such a way that even when there are stressful situations that come up now, I don't have that same trauma response anymore. I literally have rewritten my money story, and yeah, it's not fixed. It really is something that can be changed. So for anybody that's listening that has a stressful relationship with money, I really want you to know that that it is something that you can work on and that you can change.
I love that, Louise, and I'm sure that we'll talk in the future, whether with you or another guest. It's, how that relationship that we carry with money affects our other aspects of life, right? How it affects our health, our relationships, our careers, and and all the different aspects that go into our own, they go into the journey that we take through our lives, right? But it's interesting that you said that you were, that you can rewrite your money story. So for those that are listening to us, right, and this is probably, maybe someone is already aware that they don't have a healthy relationship or a relationship that serves them, right? How can people become aware? So you came across this awareness, and then you came across the way of rewriting it. So if you have somebody sitting in front of you today, or for those of you who are listening, right? What in your expert advice, how can they begin to identify and rewrite this money story so that it serves them?
That's a great question. And I think we have to briefly, before we move into kind of what people can do, we have to kind of really become aware of the fact that money stories are really just a subconscious program that we run, right? And it's where, when we were younger and based on our experiences with money, the unconscious mind is desperately trying to focus on our survival, and it is there to keep us safe. So it starts to make assumptions based on experiences that we've had, particularly ones that have an emotional charge attached to them. And that subconscious program becomes something that almost becomes like a software program that starts to get run within our psyche, within our nervous system. And so if you notice, that you have a relationship with money that is based in fear, or is based in lack, or is based in stress, or is based in anxiety, or is based in avoidance, whatever it is, it's something that's not helpful. That's when you can really start to go, oh, I can see that there's something here that is not working for me in terms of my money story, right? So the first thing that we have to do is we have to become aware of what our current money story is. And the way that we do that is we have to pause. Instead of continuing to do, take action all the time, right? Which is what we've been taught to do when it comes to money.
Absolutely.
We actually have to do to start off with. And I am not saying that we don't need to take action, because we absolutely do. But we have to slow down and take action from a place of neutrality or from positivity, rather than from the old money story, the old subconscious program. And as we start to slow down, we can start to pay attention of what our money story really is. And so we have to ask ourselves certain questions. And this is where I love journaling as a tool. It's where I love um, reflection, where we're able to really sit and ask ourselves pointed questions that can elicit a deeper response in terms of us understanding what's really going on with our relationship with money. So the kinds of questions that we might ask ourselves and that we can journal out, because journaling is really a form of self-therapy. It's actually a way of us, instead of the therapist asking us questions and us sitting in talk therapy for years and years. And again, I'm not suggesting that that's not helpful. It can be for some people, but we can do it very powerfully through something like journaling, through asking ourselves reflective questions. And so that awareness is created by asking questions like, do you remember learning from your childhood about money? Was there an experience when you were young, and it might be when you were a child or when you were a little bit older, but where your story around money changed? And then we ask ourselves, does your current experience, your current money story, does it reflect those experiences? And
Wow.
if it does, and we can see that there really is a story, that there is a repeated process that continues to happen, and that we have certain thoughts and certain feelings that go with money, we can ask ourselves even deeper questions, which is, how do you feel about money? Do you feel scared about money? Do you love money? Does it excite you? Does it make you feel anxious? Does it make you stick your head in the sand?
Right.
And then you ask yourself, what are the patterns that you follow about money?
Yeah.
Do you make a lot and then spend it all because you're scared of having it? Or do you hold on too tight and put everything that you earn into your bank account and feel that you can't let it go? Do you give too much of it away? What are the patterns that you have around money? And what are the rules that you currently have about money? And when you start to ask questions like that, and you can start to journal it out, you suddenly create an awareness of what your money story is. And that's really the first step towards being able to shift and to change your money story.
I love that. I love that so much. And when you say, Louise, so actually, since this is, about biohacking your way into wealth, would you say that that would be like a really nice way to biohack ourselves back into understanding our money story, right? And so now that we understand it, how do we rewrite it, right? So yeah, we're aware of it, we understand it. How do we rewrite it? Is it that we, I don't know, create what ideally we want to feel, what ideally we want to be able to accomplish? How do we rewrite it?
It's a really, really beautiful question. So there's kind of two parts to this. The first is exactly that, what I've kind of explained, which is we have to create this awareness around what our money story is. Once we've done that, and we can notice and sense and feel and recognize every time we move into the old money story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then have to decide, what is the money story that we want to write for ourselves? So what is it that we choose, right? So it might be, if money doesn't grow on trees, we might want to start rewriting that money story in a sense that we can create the opposite, right, of that. So we might want to create an affirmation that says, money flows freely and easily to me. I have an abundance of everything that I want and need in my life. So whatever you find your money story to be, when you've identified what those limiting beliefs are, is to then look at what the opposite is of that and start rewriting that money story. And as you start to create positive affirmations around your money story, you can start to integrate those into your lives, not just through the repetition of that affirmation on a daily basis, but from always focusing on bringing your energy back to neutrality. So if you notice that you are moving or are going into the old money story is to pause. The first thing you have to do is to focus on your frequency. What is the frequency that you're holding with money? So is to pause and become aware of that old money story, to notice where you feel it in your body. And this is a really, really beautiful biohack that I teach in my coaching programs, is the way that we heal our money story is not to ignore it or say, okay, I don't want that anymore, is to say, that's okay. I've got this money story. Where do I notice it in my body? So to take a moment, notice where you feel those sensations in your body and give them space to be there. And what you'll notice is that if you become aware of where you feel in your body, I talked earlier about how I feel it in the pit of my stomach. And I would bring my awareness not to the thoughts that go with it, but to the sensation in my body. And I would offer that sensation in my body the opportunity to be there, just as you would a child who has a fear that they're experiencing. We allow the body to express what it is that is a disharmony within it. And then you'll notice that if you just give your body a couple of minutes to express that by feeling the sensation, by coming back to the body, back to the nervous system, by turning your focus inward, you'll actually notice that that sensation will start to lighten and release. And as it does, that we've released that energy and we've come back to a place of neutrality. And then we can say, okay, now what do I choose? What do I choose that aligns with that money story that I've just rewritten? And so we have to continue to come back to neutrality, not to engage in that old money story, to come back to that energetic neutrality, to that nervous system neutrality, and then choose differently.
I love that, Louise. That's so beautiful. It's such a gentle way, and it's not talking bad about bad to ourselves, right? To say, oh, you bad person, how dare you think about this? The words out there are, we're supposed to think ourselves, we have to think ourselves into abundance, and we have to think ourselves into having the world, create this beautiful world for ourselves. But the way you're describing it, it's more of a gentle, forgiving, if there's anything to forgive. I think it's kind of like forgiving our past, right? Because they did the best they could, right? So rather than blaming our parents for raising us the way they raised us, or our grandparents, it's more from a place of gratitude, from a place of forgiveness, in a sense that you did the best you could, and I'm grateful for you doing that. However, that does not serve me today. And I'm willing to say a beautiful goodbye to that, welcome the new me, welcome the new money story that I have, and let that be my guiding force towards the future.
100%. It's so beautiful, Anna, and that self-compassion piece it's really underestimated. We live in the world, particularly in the West, which reveres the very strong doing, pushing away. Like people always talk about, I want to squash that limiting belief. I want to, and it's that sense of kind of, it's not actually about us ignoring or pushing away or fixing or changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's actually that to rewrite our money story, we actually have to do the opposite of what we've been taught to do, which is soften and kind of come back to awareness. And once we've created that place of neutrality and compassion and forgiveness, as you said, the minute we can come back to that, from that point, that's how we get to move into gratitude, move into more abundance, move into the more positive energy, right? But we have to come back to that softer, more gentle place. And then we can take action, right? Then we can do the more solid stuff that really needs doing around, like you say, allocation of where do we allocate our money, right? All the beautiful stuff that is absolutely necessary. You can't just sit there and do nothing, right?
Yes.
But our energy has to come back to a more neutral, grateful, compassionate place first. And then we can move forward with what it is that we need to do.
I love that, Louise. Thank you so much. And it's funny because our first series, it is about come back to you, right? And so it's funny that we're opening it up with our money story, and without us even coordinating or talking about it, here you're saying is that we got to come back to us. So I want to sincerely thank you so much for joining us. I know that we are going to be talking a few more things with you because we've spent some time, and I think that you have a lot to share to this world. So thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to sending those biohacks through our social media, and so that people can actually take note of some of the beautiful questions that you laid forth today, so that people can indeed become aware to it and then be able to biohack their way into rewriting their money story. So Louise, thank you so much for joining us.
You're so welcome. I've loved being here. Thank you, Anna.
Today we heard how stories shape our minds, how these stories that we have inherited, these stories that we repeat, and stories that sometimes don't even realize we're carrying, are stories about money. In today's episode, we explore how the brain's ability to rewire, its neuroplasticity, gives us the power to create new money narratives. From meditation and neurofeedback to journaling, biohacks can help us shift from scarcity to abundance, from fear to trust, because when you come back to you, you create space to notice the old scripts and then choose new ones that align with the life you want to live. When we come back next week, we'll explore the dance between doing and being, the masculine and feminine energies of wealth. But for now, take a breath, feel that sense of safety and possibility, and know that you're exactly where you're meant to be.